and most importantly, a founding member of Open Rights Group and a member of our advisory council. He's the author of many books, both fiction and non-fiction, most recently Picks and Shovels and The Bezel, which are follow-up to Red Team Blues. His most recent non-fiction book is The Internet Con: How to Seize the Means of Computation, a big tech disassembly manual. His next book, Enshittification, which comes out later this year, and that's a phrase he coined and which we will no doubt be talked about in this webinar. Maria Farrell is also a member of Org's Advisory Council. She's worked in technology policy for 20 years and taught internet governance to policymakers from around the world. She also writes articles about technology, politics, and life, as well as short stories. She's currently working on Rewild the Internet. This is How We Resist Big Tech, to be published in late 2026. I didn't actually introduce myself. I'm Pam Coburn. I work for Open Rights Group. Cory and Maria have been absolutely tremendous friends to org for many years through support and advice. And again, I just want to say a massive thank you to them for doing this. I'm going to disappear now and leave them to it. I'll be manning the Q&A and the chat and posting some stuff, but enjoy. Thanks again. And yes, I'll leave you to it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Pam. And thanks, Cory. All right, well, listen, let's dive in. We're having this because it's the org birthday party. And I wasn't around at this time because I'd moved out of the UK to France. But you, Cory, I believe, were the triggering event or person who basically caused org to be set up. The story I've heard is that there was a conference in 2005 and you were you turned up and basically said, why is there no UK Electronic Frontier Foundation? Do you remember how all of that happened and what happened afterwards?
Yeah, it wasn't just me, and it was a little more premeditated than that. Danny O'Brien, who is also a co-founder of org, was one of the founders of a thing called NTK Need to Know, which was this venerable, sarcastic, irreverent internet newsletter that was quite central to British tech culture. And Danny was still having these NTK gatherings, these conferences where they would do all kinds of things, hardware hacking and talks and competitions and silly things too, because it was quite irreverent. And they had planned one in London and I'd come over for it. I was still living in the Bay Area then. And he and I, as I recall, and James, oh God, how can I have just blanked James' surname? James, my old friend, whose name I can't remember. Hang on. It's going to autocomplete when I type it into my email.
Excellent.
I know too many James. It'll come to me. I'm having these senior moments lately. Honestly, I think that like maybe I have some long COVID or something, because I mean, yesterday I couldn't remember my street address when I was trying to give someone an address for a delivery. Now, admittedly, I don't ever give out my street address. I get my mail down the road, so that was why. But yes, God.
Oh, I hear you. I think a lot of us since COVID are just struggling. Also, and this is a bit of a theme of our call today, I think. A lot of us Gen X people who kind of thought of ourselves as the young up and comers, now we're the old farts.
That's true. That's true. Boy. James and Danny and I had this idea that we should try and cook up a founding meeting for something called the Open Rights Group. And I think Danny came up with the acronym. We sort of ambushed the attendees with this. I think we did it during maybe the closing keynote of the conference. We were like, oh, by the way, we're establishing this thing and it's a £5 sub. Will you join up? And basically, James Cronin, thank you. God damn.
James Cronin.
What is wrong with my brain?
Oh, I should be ashamed of myself too.
Oh, I'm so anyway, James, who among other things is the guy who registered bbc.com because no one at the BBC would do it. Yeah. And Danny and I all cooked this up, and I believe we hired Sue Sharman pretty quickly to be the org person, right, to organize org. And so that was the origin story of it. Boy, I'm really sorry I forgot James's name.
Don't worry, I'm similarly mortified. I should have figured that that was the James in question. Of course it was.
Boy, oh boy.
We're gonna have to buy him a pint, obviously,
Yeah,
as a recompense.
yeah.
But so I've also heard that at some point then, pretty soon thereafter, there was a meeting in the Shoreditch Town Hall. Were you there for that?
I think I was back in the Bay Area by then, but I moved to London within a year. So I was at all the meetings after that, but I wasn't at that meeting.
Oh, fair enough. No, I'm just kind of remembering going back to a lot of the people who were, founder members of org, and also just, just by way of just remembering a couple of them who aren't with us anymore, Nicholas Bohm and Caspar Bowden, absolute
Yeah.
legends and greats in terms of um tech policy, I guess, progressive tech policy in the UK. Um, Come here to me. What was I going to ask you? Yeah, so we've kind of gathered together a few of what we think are some of the highs, the great things that org has managed to achieve. A couple of them have got your name in and around them. Copyright
Hmm.
reform, a big one. That was, such a huge issue for us all, kind of the 2010s and thereabouts.
Yeah.
What's your
Well, and we lost the big one, right? We lost D-Bill or D-Act, which was the Digital Economy Act, which is its particular problem, or the thing that made it the big one, was that it had the disconnection rule in it. And thankfully, and that was a rule, for people who don't recall, that was a rule that said that if you were accused of 3 acts of copyright infringement, you would be disconnected from the internet permanently. So your address would be blacklisted from being connected. And this is a thing that's like uniquely possible in the UK because of the role that BT Openreach plays in connections, and the small number of very concentrated ISPs, cable and telephone companies. And this was Peter Mandelson's project. Like everything bad, it goes back to Peter Mandelson. And it was wildly unpopular. They ended up with a 3-line whip, so you would have been kicked out of the party if you didn't vote for it. And they passed it in the wash-up, which is that when a new election is called, Parliament dissolves, and its last act is to do what's called washing up, which is just what it sounds like. It's doing the last bits of station keeping legislation. No substantive legislation is ever supposed to go through the wash-up. And this was a hugely important piece of law that got crammed through during the wash-up. It was very disappointing to see. And it really showed the extent to which digital rights issues are bipartisan, or rather the opposition to digital rights is bipartisan. Whether that's ID cards, or prohibiting working encryption, or copyright fights. There are caucuses in all the parties that are very bad on these. And also caucuses in all the parties that are good. I broke the story about the Digital Economy Act because a very important minister in the Blair government leaked it to me. And so, there was a lot of discontent within the Blair government about this, or may have been the Brown government at that point.
Yeah, it's interesting because I do feel like going back into that period and slightly beforehand, the some of the most illiberal Home Secretaries the UK has had have been Labour ones. You had
Yeah.
your um uh oh my God, Charles Clarke and David Blunkett,
Yeah.
Straw. My goodness, oh, they could
Yep.
not. And Jack Straw was a funny one because he himself had been surveilled by the security services, but he could not get enough of imposing surveillance on other people. I've always thought that was quite psychological in a way. I
And
mean,
it's funny
yeah.
the extent to which some of their most surveillance happy ideas are kind of edifice for those individual players. Like the Tony Blair Institute has never found a problem that it can't solve by adding ID cards.
ID cards are the
Like
solution to everything, Corey. I don't know how you're not on board with this. It's been 20 years now.
it's really amazing. And the one politician on the national stage who vociferously opposed ID cards was Nick Clegg, who immediately did a U-turn on them and then went to work for Facebook. So,
Yeah.
there we go.
Yeah, it's fascinating though. I do think, as you say, there's kind of this kind of strange kind of cross-party cutting kind of civil liberties, different flavors of civil liberties, I guess, in different parties. Because in the Tories, one of the org's great friends for many years was David Davis, who
Hmm.
was famously in favor of civil liberties, as long as they didn't include a woman's right to choose. But he was very interested in,
Right.
tech policy ones, and privacy of against the state. But then also on the labor side of things, you had Tom Watson. Although I think each of them, when they went into government, would kind of slightly recuse themselves quite from active involvement in org issues. So there was. I'm sorry,
Right. And
I'm off the leash here. I kind of think of them as fair weather friends. They were great friends when they were on the back benches, but maybe not so much when they had real power.
sure. And, I also think that reflects just some realpolitik that when you are in government, the whip takes a much closer look at what you do elsewhere. And it just becomes, I have been in situations where I have governance in nonprofits where the number of people in other roles in my life that I needed to clear what I did with them through made it too cumbersome for me to be an effective overseer of a nonprofit. So, I mean, look, Tom has taken some very weird turns in recent times, but
Mm.
I actually don't think that pulling back from org when he was in government was all that surprising. I think that it probably reflected just the idea that he couldn't speak on behalf of org or do org things without so many layers of approval within the party that or within the government, both,
Yeah,
that
that makes
that
sense.
you just couldn't be an effective person.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting also how the kind of the political spectrum has changed. For a long time in the kind of early 2000s, the Lib Dems would have been the big party that was kind of consistently pro civil rights, or digital rights. And now I kind of, they're for lots of reasons less prominent, but a lot of those arguments seem to have shifted over to the Green Party, which is
Yeah.
nice to see.
Yeah, and org is obviously nonpartisan. Uh,
Yeah,
I have
so
recently
important.
joined the Greens, and I've joined them for one reason, which is to vote in the leadership race because there's a candidate in the leadership race, Polanski, who I think is good. Uh, who knows if he will be good? I thought the same thing about Nick Clegg because he talked a good line, and who knows if he'll be leader? And this is not an org endorsement. Um, I think what it does speak to is the extent to which, while org's issues are political, they are not party political, right?
Right.
It's very there. It's if we had been a Quango or just closer to Westminster Village and more intimately related with the party structures, power structures of any of the parties, I think we would have gotten less done because the parties themselves do not have an ideologically coherent posture on digital rights. I think that's what we're getting at here, is that
Yeah.
the ideology of digital rights escapes them. And in some ways, I think it escapes them for a reason that many institutions have struggled with digital technology, which is that they um, lack the technical basis to assess the policy implications, the second order policy implications of prescriptions they advance. So they'll advance some policy prescription like a copyright filter.
Hmm.
And they'll say, okay, every upload has to go through a copyright filter. And when you say, well, but as a technical matter, that copyright filter is going to have a lot of false positives and also a lot of false negatives, and it won't be hard to defeat, and it will create a barrier to entry that will limit the provision of digital services to extremely well capitalized, mostly American firms. They just at worst they put their fingers in their ears and say they can't, la la la, I can't hear you, and at best they sort of pat you on the head and they say, oh, I'm sure you clever technologists can figure this out, right? and
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
know we don't we are hamstrung in this by the activity of the tech sector itself, because one of the tech sector's favorite games is to insist that things that they don't want to do are technologically impossible. you
Oh, it's
know
a familiar
Mark.
line. Yeah. And so
Yeah.
but then in terms of encryption backdoors, probably government ministers are inclined to go, well, you told us lots of things weren't possible and it
Yeah,
turned out they were, so why isn't this one?
you told us that it was impossible for two people to talk to each other without Mark Zuckerberg listening in. That was a lie, right? So
Yeah.
is it a lie that where there's no way to make encryption that only works when good guys are using it, not when bad guys are using it? And that they have muddied the waters, right, or poisoned the well on the technical feasibility of these things. And so, because digital, I mean, this is I think the crisis of digital policymaking, because digital touches so many aspects of our lives, there is a digital component to every policy question, right? Education,
Yeah.
health,
Yeah. Yeah.
employment, and so on. You may remember Martha Lane Fox when she was the champion for digital inclusion, I think in the Brown government, or maybe it was the coalition.
It was
She
kind of,
asked PricewaterhouseCooper to do a study of the impact of internet access on people's lives. And by lucky happenstance, there were two council blocks that were more or less next to each other, but one was within range of the central office and able to be connected to DSL, and the other one was just be on the other side of the line. And so you had one building full of people with broadband, another building of people without, but who were in other regards very, very similar demographically. And PwC's conclusion was that, like, everything we use to measure the quality of life in a modern society is improved by internet access. Civic and political engagement, employment, health, friendship, loneliness, income, just like all of those things, right? All gets better when you connect people to the internet. And so the corollary of that is that every one of those issues has an internet dimension.
mhm.
And that means that policymakers, for good reason, want to make internet policy, and that policymakers get understandably frustrated when they're told that if they touch that string, that all the strings next to it are going to vibrate, right? That there's no way to. It's like it's a game of kerplunk, right? You say, okay, well, we're worried about, I don't know, to use something like contemporary, we're worried about grooming gangs, and so we want to look into encryption. And then all of a sudden you're like, well, what about all these other equities that involve working encryption, whether that's commercial surveillance or non-state actors, and griefers and so on, identity thieves, corporate espionage, national security, right? All of a sudden, like, everyone has said, well, you can't touch that, right? Because that is inextricably connected to all these other policy dimensions. And, this is what makes being a digital policy advocate urgent and hard, is that unless you have an appreciation for all the ways these things interconnect, your policies will be bad. And everyone wants to make a policy, and most of them don't have that appreciation.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly it. And I mean, if they didn't make such terrible decisions with such alarming frequency, I'd feel more sympathy for policymakers.
Sure.
But no, you're right. You're absolutely right. It's tricky. I mean, I've
Well,
literally
and
never, yeah, go ahead.
to take it out of the realm of poor policymakers, just consider our friends, right? People
Yeah.
who are like, well, maybe we should ban scraping because AI is a problem. I think there are lots of things wrong with AI. I think banning scraping is a way to make sure that you won't have the Wayback Machine or search engines anymore. And we can talk about whether, like, individual systems are being overloaded by badly configured scrapers, but the idea that we would create like a new right not to be scraped is how, like, a company can change its terms of service and then insist that they've never changed because no one was ever allowed to scrape them and save them, right? Or no one will be ever able to make an accessibility tool that scrapes and reformats data on the internet. Like all of those things that are just about that are all the best things in the internet. And our normie friends who just want no more slop are like, yeah, we should just ban scraping. You know,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
uh,
Everything on the
sort of,
internet
right?
is connected to so many other things, and you pull this string here, and building collapses
Yeah.
over there, and yeah, it is. I
So
mean, it's hugely complicated.
we don't have to have sympathy for politicians, but we can have sympathy for non-technical friends.
That is fair, and that is a broad category. Actually, just in kind of the interest of the horseshoe of time, since we brought up kind of AI and large language models and scraping and that, I was just wondering what your thoughts are on, some people in the digital policy world are kind of now thinking, well, copyright, they were the enemy for so long, the copyright lobby, but it turns out maybe that's the one tool that kind of helps us to limit some of the extractive abuses of the very very concentrated capital heavy large language models and picture scraping and the rest of it. What are in your mind kind of the limitations, the pitfalls, and possibly the possibilities of that kind of strange alliance at this some point of, artists and of
Yeah.
creators and the people whose large companies whose job is to exploit the creators.
Yeah, boy, this issue is so thorny that I actually decided I had to write a book about it, and I'm going to be working on it when this call ends. It's a 35,000 word long pamphlet slash short book that I'm writing for Farrar, Straus and Giroux called The Reverse Centaur's Guide to AI, and
Fantastic.
it's due second week of August. So I'm writing it in about a month. And it's really just pulling together a bunch of other pieces I've written where I try to tease apart this issue. So on the side of creative labor markets, hang on, how far back do I want to go? Let me do this in three phases. So the first phase is, why is there so much investment in AI? And I think the reason there is so much investment in AI from particularly from the largest firms, the established tech firms, is that they are very frightened of being perceived as mature firms that are no longer growing. And that's because in the shares market, firms that are perceived as growing, their shares traded as a significant premium, 5 to 10 times higher than the premium on the shares of firms that are mature. So if you have two firms, one of which is mature and one of which is growing, so ASDA versus Amazon, say, for every pound each of those firms bring in, the shares market will value the Amazon pound at like 5x what they'll value the ASDA pound, which means that Amazon now has shares that they can use to buy things, because dollars or pounds are hard to get. You have to wait until a customer comes through the door and gives them to you. But shares you make by typing zeros into a spreadsheet. And so if you want to acquire another firm, and these tech firms do a lot of acquisitions, or if you want to hire key personnel, you can buy them in shares. And that's an enormous advantage. And it's a virtuous cycle, a self-reinforcing phenomenon, because if you can acquire other firms and talent at a discount relative to your competitors, you can keep growing. And so it's a kind of self-lubricating machine, a self-licking ice cream cone.
Mhm.
And when people criticize capitalism, they say, "Oh, growth at all costs is the ideology of a tumor." They ignore this like material reason, right? It's not that they have an ideology of growth; it's that they have a material reason to show the market that they're growing, and that the corollary of that is if they stop growing, then they're a mature firm, and their share price falls by 80%. And when their share price falls by 80%, then all of their key personnel leave because they're all being paid in shares, and they can't hire new people to replace them because those people expect to be paid in cash at a mature firm. And a lot of programmers who might be in org's orbit will know that this is part of your life cycle. You work for buzzy startups until you're 45, and then you go work for a very solid, an automaker or something in their IT department or in their technology department, and it's very boring and very reasonable. And you work a 40-hour week, and that's all anyone expects of you. And your stock options are not going to make you a millionaire. And it means that high flying companies, when they stop climbing, they nosedive. And so that's why companies really want to tell a growth story. And it's very hard to tell a growth story if you're like Google. Google
Mhm.
has a 90% market share in search, right?
Yeah.
Where do they grow, right? Like they could, raise 1 billion humans to maturity and make them Google customers, which is like the business model for Google Classroom, but it takes 18 years. And so they need another land to conquer. And so the market believes that AI is going to be a really big market. And the reason the market believes AI is going to be a really big market is they think they're going to be able to fire workers and replace them with AI. That's the reason, right? It's not that people think that you're going to be able to like have fun with AI, or like have a conversation with AI, or an AI girlfriend, or any of those other things. The business, or really importantly, no one's like, "Oh, I'm going to capitalize this AI company because I bet they can make a lot of money on political disinformation." That's not to say that these things aren't real. It's just not the material factors that are going into the financing of AI. And if you're worried about AI being financed to do bad things, you should be attacking the reasons they're being financed, because they're not making any money. All of their money just comes from finance capital. And so if you need to understand that the story of AI is being told to investors, not to users. And you have to understand what the significance of that story is. So I don't think AI can do most of our jobs, and I don't think it will do most of our jobs. I think that there are lots of aspects of our jobs that AI might make easier. I was writing an article a couple of weeks ago, and I couldn't remember which podcast I'd heard a quote in, and normally I would have just not included it, but I downloaded a model called Whisper that OpenAI, a company I think is one of the worst companies in the history of the world, made. It's an open source model. I stuck it on my little consumer laptop, and 2 hours later, it had transcribed 30 hours of podcasts that I'd recently listened to, and I found the exact quote. And I was able to, it had time code. I went and listened to it. I verified it was great. Right. So there are things that are coming out of AI that can make your job easier, but I don't think an AI could or ever will write that article for me. And I don't think it matters how much training data we give the AI. I think the idea that if you keep feeding training data to an AI, it will eventually become intelligent is like saying, well, if we keep breeding horses to run faster and faster, eventually one of these mares will give birth to a locomotive, right? The difference between a statistical prediction autocomplete model and an intelligent person is not how much data the autocomplete model has. It's just it's a category error. And so,
and just to put in there, just interrupting your flow for a moment. We'll come back to the copyright thing. I mean, I think part of that is like you're a writer and I'm a writer, and there are people, lots of people listening in, who are creative in specific ways. And part of what makes us interesting, I think, is because we come up with stuff that nobody was expecting.
right.
It's the stuff that kind of brushes against the grain a bit and is a bit like, uncomfortable or weird or, funny or non-obvious. Like that's kind of why people are interested in writing. But of course, AI isn't producing good writing. It's producing good enough writing that does the job that capital thinks that writing does. So
right.
in that sense, is copyright a very reliable ally
Right.
to
Well, and I
just as
think
happy with shitty writing as brilliant writing?
right. Yeah. So I think you're getting at something important here, which is that even if AI can't do your job, maybe an AI salesman can convince your boss to fire you and replace you with AI that can't do your job.
Right.
And one of the reasons that's really important to keep in mind is that if you are someone who doesn't have any particularized regard for the economic fortunes of creative workers or other kinds of workers, and it is attuned more to your own costs, and someone comes to you and says, you will save money when we fire workers and replace them with AI, right? You'll be able to, you won't need to worry about how many nurses the NHS can afford because the AI will do it. And then you won't have a, antibiotic resistant infection that isn't caught early, and you won't die. So you should like AI, even if the nurses don't like it. The thing is, if we stipulate that AI will do the nurse's job, then that's a very hard argument to counter. But if we hew to the technical reality that AI can't do the nurse's job, but that the nurse can be replaced with an AI that can't do the job, and the AI is going to be worse than a nurse, and that you will die because they fired the nurse and replaced them with a chatbot, then we're on the same side as the people on the buy side of the AI. And it keeps capital from splitting the coalition between consumption and production. And so we should really remember that. Now, on the question of copyright, once you kind of take all of that in its totality, why AI exists, what AI says makes it valuable, what AI's real characteristics are, you have to ask, well, will copyright fix any of these problems, right? Will if Getty Images prevails in its lawsuit against, I think they're suing OpenAI or Perplexity. I can't remember which one they're suing. But they're trying to end photo generation of celebrities made with images trained partly on their own corpus. And if Getty Images prevails, what happens to photographers? Right. Well, so if Getty Images prevails, they will establish an unambiguous right under copyright to prevent the training of an AI model with a copyrighted work. Despite what people will have you believe, it's not unambiguous that copyright exists today. If you decompose training an AI model to its individual steps, each of those steps is pretty clearly fair dealing, or at least some of the times fair dealing, right? Like, so making a transient copy of a work in order to analyze it, that is legal. It's legal even if the work isn't lawfully acquired. Like if you go to a car boot sale and you buy a bootleg CD and you count how many adjectives there are in the lyrics, the counting of the adjectives doesn't become a copyright infringement, right?
Yeah.
Maybe acquiring the CD is a copyright infringement, but the counting of the adjectives does not. And it's really important that we ground this in what copyright currently says. Publishing that also not a copyright infringement. And so, these various steps that take place in the training of a model, each of them are colorably fall into a copyright exception at least some of the time. But we could change that, right? Copyright didn't come down off a mountain on stone tablets. So if we have a judge or a legislature change the law or resolve the legal ambiguity to say training a model is unlawful, Getty now gets the ability, as does every photographer that Getty works with, gets the ability to say, you may not train a model with my work. And also, you may train a model with my work. Well, Getty, which is in a highly concentrated sector that buys stock photography from photographers, will do what it's already done with all the other copyrights photographers have. They will make it a non-negotiable term of selling to Getty that you assign that right to Getty. So if you want to, and this will be true of Corbis and all the other agencies, in the same way that it'll be true of the 5 publishers, the 4 labels, the 3 movie studios, the 2 ad tech companies, and the 1 company that controls all the ebooks and audiobooks, right? They will just revise all of their contracts to just say this right you have to assign to us. And they will build a corpus of work they have the unambiguous right to train a model with. And the thing that Getty hates more than anything, except people taking their work and not paying for it, is paying photographers.
Yeah.
Right? Their entire business is structured around 3 things: selling photographers' work to the public or to media customers, stopping people from acquiring those works without paying for them, and paying as little to photographers as possible.
Yeah.
And so Getty will then turn around and ask OpenAI to make them a model that they can use to fire photographers, right? That's what'll happen. And that's what'll happen with publishers and with record labels and so on, right?
Yeah, I've recently been just kind of, I'm not going to say negotiating because my agent is doing that, but like a publishing contract with one of the big 5, and I spent a lot of time just saying like, no, we need to have AI stuff in here, and no, I'm not just assigning all of that to you, and no, you've got like to people who are just not maybe as aware as we might be, of saying like, no, the next step in the game is that then they just license my stuff to the bad guys, not that they will, or the extractive guys. Like there's no sense in which the publisher and I are, and I love my editors, but there's no sense in which their bosses are on the same side as me. So I see the limits of copyright pretty clearly.
You're a class ally with your editor because your editor works in an industry with 5 employers, which means that it's the same problem you have, which is that if no one will offer you fair terms, you run out of buyers really quickly. And your editor has the problem that if they don't toe the line for their employer, they run out of potential employers very quickly too. And so you're both on the sell side of labor in what's called a monopsony, which is a market controlled by powerful buyers, as opposed to monopoly controlled by powerful sellers, although it's that too. So what do we do, right? Because this doesn't mean that there isn't anything we can do about AI. The point of this book I'm writing now is to like be a good AI critic and know what to demand. So here's an interesting thing. I've been fighting the US Copyright Office since like 2001. And I don't think we've agreed on anything in all that time. But I find myself in unusual and vigorous agreement with the US Copyright Office over the last 4 or 5 years, because the US Copyright Office, not about everything, but they keep saying something that I think is facially true, which is that works generated by AI are not entitled to a copyright. Because, to use a bit of UN jargon here from the World Intellectual Property Organization, which is where all the copyright laws come from, copyright inheres at the moment of fixation of a work of human creative labor, right? So when you fix an intangible medium, something that a human created that is creative, it can't just be mechanical. A phone directory is not copyrightable, but a haiku is, right? It doesn't have to be a lot of work, but it has to be some creativity. Then a copyright appears, and it endures in most places now for the life of the creative worker and 70 years. And I think in the UK it's still 50. And in the case of commercial works, 90 or 70. And so that's the boundary of copyright. So when a monkey takes a selfie, there's no copyright, right? Because the
Yeah.
monkey's not a human. And that's why the monkey selfie is everywhere, because there's no copyright in monkey selfies, and there's no copyright in AI. And remember, the things that Getty hates worst is not that, like, in their hierarchy of things they hate, people taking things without paying them is higher than paying their photographers, right? They
Right.
hate paying photographers less than they hate people taking things without paying for them. And
Yeah.
if we say, as the US Copyright Office and several federal courts, including at the appellate division, have said, works made by an AI don't get a copyright, then our employers, right, the capital side of this relationship, who would rather drink a gallon of warm spit before breakfast every day for the rest of their lives than let people have their stuff without paying for it, will say, well, sure, we'll just pay these workers. It's not a big part of our bottom line anyway. We don't like doing it, obviously, but we want it, it's fine, right? Just no copyright in these works. Right. So
Yeah.
that's one thing that I think has the potential to work, as opposed to just like giving creators like another way to be angry about people taking their works, for like using their works the wrong way. This is a thing that will actually like pay their rent, right?
Yeah.
Which
And
is
it's
important.
amazing to me that also this is the fundamental insight which do you remember the Hollywood writers and actors strike 2 years ago, more or less this month? Their insight and what they locked into their contracts with Hollywood studios was, a bunch of stuff around AI, and was basically, okay, studios, you can use AI to generate a script, but you can't have copyright on it and you can't sell it, and it's going to have a complete, and that just changes the game, that just little tweak.
Well, and the other piece here is that the Hollywood writers are organized, right?
Yeah,
They're in a
that's
union.
how. They're union
and
on top of it.
and that's the, look, like giving more rights to people who don't have the leverage to defend them is
Mm,
like giving bullied kids extra lunch money, right? There's like no amount of lunch money that gets that kid lunch, right? The bullies just take it off of them at the school gates. And
yeah.
so what a union does is it allows you to change the structure of the market that these rights you're supposed to be selling are moving around in. And, here in the United States, we have had consistent failures in labor. So under the Biden administration, we had a very favorable labor environment. The general counsel of the National Labor Relations Board, Jennifer Abruzzo, had all these incredible ideas, like and rulings. Like she said, anytime employer interferes with a union election in a way that could materially affect the outcome, the election doesn't need to happen. The union is automatically recognized, right? So like it's like putting a
Wow.
pinball tilt in a
It
union
creates
election
different
to
incentives.
cause
Yeah.
people to, you
Inverts
know,
them. Yeah.
yeah,
What do you
and
think is the just to sort of
yeah,
come to some of our org stuff, like what is the role of an organization like the Open Rights Group? Obviously, it's not a union, it's multi-sectoral, multi-class, multi kind of person. Like what in terms of like fighting back against raw power and this, what we've seen, I think, in the 20 years org has been around, this kind of coming together of state power and private sector power in terms of data collection, analysis, extraction, abuse and misuse and abuse. What does an org do? Like, should it be more intersectional? Like, does it need to be, more reaching
mhm,
out to people, or where basically what is, I mean, that's a big question with a bunch of stuff in it. Like, not just
right,
tactically, what do we do now, but strategically, I feel like our role has
yeah.
changed in the 20 years. So where do we need to go?
So change is almost always the result of coalitions forming. Um, sometimes change occurs because someone has a cool new tactic that allows the same group of people to do more. I think of
Yeah.
like Obama in the run up to the 2008 election, the way you use social media, say. Um,
Right. Yeah.
but mostly, change is when groups of people who disagree about some things put aside those disagreements and come together to campaign for a thing, for one thing. And I've had more experience with the Electronic Frontier Foundation than with org, but I think that there are similar roles that they play here. So EFF has a fetish to the point of it being sometimes self-limiting about never being wrong, right? So we'd rather be late than wrong. And so we will, and we would rather be thorough than wrong. So where there are issues that have second order effects, where it'd be really nice to take this position, but if we do, there's some other things, that some ways that it could bite us in the bum later. We don't take those positions. So, for example, I agitated very heavily within EFF in the Google antitrust trial to make one of the remedies deleting the surveillance data that Google has on us. And the problem is that the standard under US law for judicial orders of data deletion is something called intermediate scrutiny. And that is how we stop judges from ordering journalists to delete whistleblower memos, whistleblower leaks.
Right.
And if we weaken intermediate scrutiny, then we expand the realm of activity that judges can enjoin from publication, or we expand the kind of documents that judges can order the destruction of, not just private data. So, we ended up briefing for Google being prohibited from using that data, but not ordered to delete it, right? And so, this is a nuanced position. It's hard to explain. It made that campaign less successful, to be very frank, right? But all of our coalition partners, everyone we work with on every issue, every time, knows that if we say something, it's for a reason. And if we take a position, it's well thought through. And if there's an aspect of an issue that they don't understand, and we have told them what side to be on, and they're in a hurry because there's a vote, or there's a something we need to do, we have to get a letter out, we have to get people into the streets. If we say, look, this will take a long time to explain, but you don't want to do this, you want to do this instead,
You've got
we have the
credibility.
credibility to do that.
Yeah,
And
that makes a lot of sense.
we talked earlier about the gnarliness of tech issues and the ubiquity of tech issues. And so other people who campaign on impunity and power and the abuse of power are always going to be running up against tech. How can they not, right? And they need an honest broker who is reliable, thorough, and right, who can be in their coalition with them so that they can make sure that they don't get themselves into trouble. I mean, I think about like Ashton Kutcher, the actor, who has taken on this campaign against sex trafficking, and in so doing has ended up lifting the or eroding the safe harbor that American online platforms have, that means that they don't have to police all their user speech. And now, if there's a chance that the user speech involves sex trafficking, they are jointly liable if it turns out to do it. And so what's happened is all consensual sex work material hosted by American tech platforms has disappeared, including all the places where sex workers were organizing, were trading tips about bad dates, and we're doing all the things that had made pimping all but disappear. Pimps are back now in America because sex work happens in the street now, because it's been chased off the internet because of Ashton Kutcher. And, EFF and groups like EFF told Ashton Kutcher about this effect. And he did what policymakers do. He said, I don't believe it, and I'm sure you'll figure it out.
Yeah, that's the problem when you ally celebrity power and superficiality to really, really important gnarly issues. Yeah. Hey, I was going to ask about just a couple of the really big kind of tidal events that have happened in UK tech policy in the last 20 years. One of them is the Snowden revelations, and the other is going to be Brexit. So, seeing as I want to leave time for other people's questions, so yeah, just your idea on these great big,
Sure.
tectonic events and how, from your perspective, they have shaped things here.
Well, Snowden was obviously very, very big. And I remember when it happened, very vividly. I was actually on a panel that night, just coincidentally. And no one knew who Snowden was yet. So we'd seen the leak, right? We saw the Prism leak, but Snowden, the video of Snowden talking hadn't come out. I think it came out while we were on stage. And so we were just talking about this revelation that the NSA had taps into all the American big tech platforms that we're on. And I think that the Snowden revelations made a dent, but did not shatter the smug consensus about nothing to fear, nothing to hide, nothing to fear. Surveillance is how we solve all of our problems. It's how you get the buggers to behave. And also that surveillance, and this is where we get into Brexit, surveillance is what you substitute for labor under conditions of austerity. Right.
Yeah. A
So
very attractive policy option. Yeah.
yeah, like it's funny, you know, I'm a great fan of this podcast, Trash Future, British
I love it.
tech comedy podcast. And one of the things that are pains to point out is that British Tories are the only conservatives in the world who actually do what conservatives say they want to do when it comes to downsizing the state, across the board, including with police services, right? Every other conservative is like, we're going to defund everything except the police. And the Tories are like, no, 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 we're coming for the cops too. And what they're replacing the cops with, which is the same thing they're replacing teachers with, which is the same thing they're replacing doctors with, which is the same thing they're replacing social workers with, is surveillance, right? Why have a cop on the beat? Why have a teacher in the schoolyard when you can just have a camera,
Yeah.
right?
And I do
Uh,
sort of wonder if the tax codes of most, OECD countries have something to play here in that there are usually greater tax,
hmm.
benefits to capital investment. So let's buy a bunch of surveillance kits, than having lots of people on your payroll. So there's this constant ratcheting up
Hmm.
effect. Let's just buy more gear and more stuff. Do you
I
think
don't
that's
know
a
if
thing, or
tax
that's one of
codes
my pet theories?
did,
Tell me.
did tax codes impact local and national governments though?
Not so much, but I just think a generalized preference for
Sure,
capital
firms.
investment
Yeah,
over payroll.
yeah.
Like
Well,
people
and then the
are
other thing,
capital is assets and people are liabilities, I guess.
right? Yes, no, that's very true. And then the other thing is that there is no business model for hiring more cops, right? Like no one, apart from the police union, uh, is briefing Westminster or a local government for putting more cops on the beat. But there is a very well-paid salesperson who is there trying to sell you a CCTV, right? And
Yeah.
you know, if you think of this as like a set of forces acting on a system, you have pressure on one side to do procurement, to acquire things. And you have no pressure on the other side to spend the budget on people. I remember I saw Corey Kreider, who's now at Foxglove, back when she was at Reprieve. She did a presentation on how little is known about civilian casualties from the drone programs in Pakistan and Syria and other places. And she explained, and it was at an orgcon, and she explained that the CIA has taken the budget they used to spend for guys in Lawrence of Arabia robes with putty noses to walk around the marketplace and say, like, hey, buddy, do you know how many people died in that last missile strike? And they've replaced it with computers, right?
Hmm.
They replaced them with data centers. And the reason for that, I think, is that nobody lobbies the CIA for Lawrence of Arabia robes and putty noses. And they are lobbied relentlessly to buy computers. And there is a giant budget, right? There's a giant private sector budget lobbying the CIA to buy computers, and no private sector budget and no public sector budget lobbying them to hire people. I don't want more people working for the CIA, just to be clear here. But it's a way to understand the dynamic. It's a way to understand the forces in public procurement.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And it's kind of one of the fundamental kind of structural powers that, org is up against, obviously, and trying always to present a different narrative. I often feel that when I'm at conferences and that, I've been at things where like you and maybe, I don't know, Ian Brown and Corey Kreider, people will be up on the stage doing their thing beside a bunch of, meta lobbyists. And our guys always seem to have the better tunes, the better stories, because we have to be better, because
Sure.
we don't get, 99 visits into the policymaker's office afterwards. We just get that one time.
Right. I mean, they can win their day by like taking people out for lavish dinners and having junkets and doing all kinds of other things, right? We can only win the argument by being right. And so we have to try harder. The other thing is that sometimes we will move in, like we as a movement will move into forums where there's never been opposition. So this was like what it was like when I got to the UN, to the World Intellectual Property Organization, where the only NGOs were industry associations for corporate sector. So
Yeah.
pharma was there, and IFP was there, the record industry lobbyists, and the Motion Picture Association were there. Those were the NGOs at WIPO. And
Wow.
without any opposition, they didn't send people who were good at their jobs, right? Because why
Ah,
would you send your A team to a place where you never had to fight, right? Because the majority of delegations to UN mission to Geneva from the global south, who have most of the votes, are people who are experts in things that matter to the global south, right? Water, children's health, right? Climate these days, probably, right? Like IP experts are not going in the national delegation of 4 people who are sharing a nosebleed expensive apartment in Geneva, right? From Burundi or whatever. And like these guys would just go around and lie to the national delegates. They would just tell them like unambiguously untrue things. And then when we got there, we would like talk to these national delegates, and they would say, well, it's easy for you to say because in America, this is the policy. And we go like, no, that's illegal in America. That's like, not only has that never been the policy, it could not be the policy in America. And they'd be like, oh dear, I'll have to speak to Mr. So-and-so. And the person who brought me there was Jamie Love from Knowledge Ecology International. And he'd been there forever working on medicine stuff. And I asked Jamie, like, who's Mr. So-and-so? And he said, oh, that's the lobbyist from the American National Association of Broadcasters. He's just finished a tour of policymakers in Africa, explaining to them how American broadcast policy works, and apparently lying through his teeth the whole way. And so it was briefly quite easy to really win these otherwise very difficult fights. Like at one point, they started stealing our handouts and putting them in the toilets. And all of a sudden, every national delegation who are like getting bombarded with handouts anyways, and like have all these policy and position white papers to read, we're suddenly like, well, I want to read the one that someone hid in a toilet. That one sounds spicy.
That's got real cachet. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it's I have noticed often how in Brussels in particular, but a lot of the big tech lobbyists are surprisingly thin-skinned. Like a lot of our kind of, when we sort of win those kind of public rounds, which are sometimes just symbolic, but it really gets to them. It's been remarkable over the last 10 years to see them kind of shifting from being the most popular people in the room, the people sponsoring all the parties everyone wants to go to losing their social license. And of course, a lot of that is down to organizations like org, like EFF, like Privacy International, like ACLU over you guys. I mean, EDRI in Europe, just kind of continuing to say, no, this is your story and your frame is not what actually is. It's not the only one.
I should say I'm slightly concerned, right? Because that we have thrown out some babies with our bathwater and the techlash. Like, we make a lot of fun of moving fast and breaking things, which is to say, unilaterally altering how technology works. And I think it depends on whose technology you're unilaterally altering. Like, I'm all for like cutting the wires to the CCTV, right? That is moving fast and breaking things. I want to reverse engineer Facebook and put ad blockers in it, and Instagram, and make alt clients for them that let you just see the things posted by people you follow, or better yet, import them into another, meta client, that like multi-protocol client that lets you read all the messages posted by all the people on all the services you have and commodifies them. I think it should be, I think that like, knowing which service a message you're reading was posted on should be as weird as knowing what SIM your friend had in their phone when they called you. And the only way they're not going to do that, right? We're going to have to do that. In fact, the phone companies didn't make SIM independence voluntarily either, right? They used to have all these things where it was grotesquely expensive to call someone who wasn't on the same carrier, and then people who were on the same carrier you could group in a family and friends group, but only if they would switch carriers and so on. Like, it was like a policy fight to get them there. So I'm all for like moving fast and breaking Elon Musk's things and Mark Zuckerberg's things.
Yeah.
And I think we can.
Yeah. Sorry, this is just a great segue to
Sure.
can we talk about Picks and Shovels, your new novel?
Sure.
I don't want to do this in a gross like let's do some mirth here, but like I love this. I love this book. This is the third of your Marty Hench books. And in this one, Marty Hench, Marty Hench, we knew from your first book, Red Team Blues, about him. He's a computer security expert. In that book, he's, I guess, in his late 50s, early 60s. It's
Or late 60s, 67.
Oh, he's 67. And in
Yeah.
this book, you've kind of brought him back to San Francisco in 1984, 86, thereabouts.
Around there. Yeah.
And it's that moving fast and breaking things open and hacking, as we used to think of it as, hacking is kind of a way of like putting things together to build new things. I just love how you were the person who, also, well, in all sorts of ways, have written books that have gotten me through tough times because they're just so interesting. Marty Hench is he's just a character who's all about like, I want to learn how to be a decent human. I want to figure out how to do good and useful things in this life. I love that. But also the book has lots of like, here's how those weird little gizmos work that people put on phones, that are all owned by AT&T to make them interoperable. Like you're the guy who kind of says, okay, folks, there's this word called interoperability. Most of you won't know what it is. I'm not even going to hold your hand, but I'm going to tell you some great stories about how it works. And also, crucially, how awesome you are going to feel when it has worked and you have that cool thing in your hand. Like, how important is the storytelling of this to you? I mean, it's pretty integral, I think, is it?
Yeah. So look, I think exposition gets a bad rap in fiction. There's this received wisdom, show don't tell, and I think the reason for that is that it's hard to do exposition, or it's easier to do drama that's engaging. It's right there in the name, drama, than it is to do exposition. Which isn't to say that it's impossible, but in the same way that if you were like debugging a program, you might start with the thing that most people screw up.
Mm,
You're trying to incorporate this library. It's impossible. It's notoriously hard to get right. Source of many bugs. Let's start there. Let's like try removing that library and putting in one that has maybe fewer functions, but also has fewer ways it can go wrong, and see if that solves it. In the same way, when you're critiquing fiction, I think it's often like, well, I don't really know why this story isn't working, but there's this exposition here. Exposition is really hard to do right. Let's swap that out for some drama and see if the story is better, right? Try something easier. But good exposition is fantastic, right? I mean, look, we're still reading Moby Dick. It's been a couple hundred years, right? Neil Stephenson, Cryptonomicon, 6,000 words on eating Captain Crunch cereal. I'd read a novella of that, right? I'd read a trilogy of Neil Stephenson describing eating Captain Crunch cereal. Is such a good passage.
oh my
And
God,
that's the
everything I
thing,
know
is
about the
like,
Pacific War, I learned from that book. The Pacific Theater.
totally. And
Yeah.
and that's the thing, is that, like when hard things are done well, they're especially impressive. And so while, yeah, it's easy to screw up, when you don't screw up, boy, is it good. And so I'm a big fan of exposition. There's a lot of exposition in my fiction, both for ideological reasons and for artistic reasons. And I do think that one of science fiction's superpowers at its best is that it can disrupt the technology narrative that there is
Mm.
only one way that technology can work. To the kind of the place where Mark Zuckerberg meets Margaret Thatcher, right? There is no alternative.
Yeah.
It's literally inconceivable that you could like talk to a friend without me listening in. That's like asking for water that's not wet, right? And technology is like, no, there's like 11 alternative, or science fiction rather, is like, there's 11 alternatives. I can imagine them before breakfast, and here they all are. Here's 11 sort of well fleshed out inhabitable futures or presents or recent pasts in which things are different than they are now. History is contingent. Teleology is bunk. What we do matters. Human agency is a thing. And so I think that when you read science fiction about people using technology in ways that are unexpected and that benefit them, that informs the policy debate, as well as when you hear about people using technology in ways that are oppressive to people, or that make people's lives worse. I actually think I was writing something the other day for Locus magazine, and I do think that the polar opposite of there is no alternative is William Gibson's The Street Finds Its Own Use for Things.
I love that. That is such a pregnant phrase, and it just keeps on giving, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
And it just, because it's just kind of encapsulates in a single sentence the liberatory power of technology, which I think is why is sort of almost the origin story of most of us in there. Like, and I have almost zero technical skills, but yet, was completely drawn in the 90s by that. And I think it's why a lot of us got into this, and why we're still in this, is because we can, see like what it can do, what it does, when
Yeah.
people use it differently. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
would,
I mean, look, that like what the gadget does is important, but who it does it for and who it does it to is way more important. And like the same advanced networked camera and vision system that warns you when your car drifts out of its lane can also ring the insurance company and have them add a tenner to your bill that month because you drift out of your lane, right?
yeah,
And this
yeah,
is a social matter. It's not a technical one. But whether or not you're allowed to modify your car so that it's incapable of calling the insurer is both a technical and a policy question. And, back to moving fast and breaking things. Yeah, we should have more effective privacy law, but also we should have the ability to just modify our technology, not because it's a substitute for a better privacy law, but because it is a more immediate response than asking a state enforcer to step in. And because it changes the equilibrium in the boardroom, because if the people in the boardroom are contemplating doing something adverse to your interests and they know that you're helpless to undo that, then there's no reason for them not to. But if they have to contemplate the possibility that you'll unilaterally alter your technology so that you are fully disconnected from them, and that it will be just as easy for you to get service or parts or an upgrade or your next product from someone else because you are no longer tied into their ecosystem, because you put in an ad blocker, you put in a tracking blocker, you put in an alt client, you did something that just disconnected you from them, then it might stay their hand. And so we should have law, but we should have the ability of technologists and the people who rely on them to unilaterally alter their gadgets, their services.
yeah. Well, exactly. And it kind of brings me to one of the questions actually that somebody put in ahead of time. And I'll just frame this a little bit, because I think at Open Rights Group, and I think for a lot of us in this space, I kind of feel a moment, a move just away from, from always being on the reactive kind of mode of saying, please don't do this, you'll kill people, please don't do this, you'll kill people. Like, and we have been doing that for 20 years. And I'm sure we saved some lives, but there's kind of a real sense of, no, we're always reacting, and having to say no to things. And it takes up all of our space and all of our time and
Mhm.
limited years and energy, on this planet, to be like building the things that we want to see. So we had a question from Joel Bodie, and it was, and in the sense of things you want, things to say yes to, building the real alternatives, is he asked, what initiative, project, community that you're not involved in and that isn't Open Rights Group most inspires you and gives you hope for the future?
Probably the disability rights world,
Ah,
especially where it intersects with technology. There are so many key principles in the way that disability advocates express their movement or their demands, right? So there's this old idea, nothing about us without us, which I found out actually dates back, it's medieval. It was the
wow.
Polish barons version of the Magna Carta to the King of Poland, is where this phrase originates, right? Like, you can't make decisions that involve us without talking to us first. And that is as foundational to disability rights, where you're saying, well, like, look, don't make a thing that helps someone who has low vision unless you're talking to people who have low vision and involving them in that decision, because you can't know, unless you have low vision, you can't know all of the circumstances. But there's another aspect of it that I think is really important in disability rights, which is that there is this idea in disability rights that how technology interacts with you is necessarily idiosyncratic. So I worked on a thing called the Treaty of Marrakesh. It started off as the Access to Knowledge movement, but became the Treaty of Marrakesh, which is the first WIPO copyright treaty on the rights of people with disabilities to access copyrighted works. And the people from the publishers lobby and the movie lobby and so on, they were like, okay, if you're blind, you need this, and if you're deaf, you need that, right?
Hmm.
And the leaders of our coalition from the disability rights movement were like, well, there are people who can't read because they don't have arms, and so they can't turn the page, right?
Yeah.
And there's people who need audiobooks because they have dyslexia or a brain injury. And there are people, like there are people who are paralyzed and have to lie on their backs. And so they need to be able to access a certain kind of reader that is up here and not here, or maybe a projector. And so maybe if you're blocking HDMI outputs, unless they're encrypted, then low end projectors won't be able to access it. All this stuff that's like just not in the room when people who are able-bodied are talking about this stuff. And the thing is that idiosyncratic need is to a lesser extent, but ineluctably part of all of our lives, right? That no one can ever anticipate all of the ways that we will need to adapt our technology in the moment. I was in Edinburgh on a book tour, and I dropped my laptop getting out of a cab, and I broke my screen, and I had a rectangle about that wide down the edge that I could use until I could get back to London and get a new screen. And I was able, thanks to weird Linux commands, to resize my screen to just that rectangle so that all of my UI was drawn in one little rectangle on my screen. And it saved my ass, right? And like there is no boardroom, there's no product planning meeting in which what happens if our user drops their laptop and only has a 3-inch strip of screen to use for 48 hours. We should have an option to resize screens, right? Yeah. But by like burying deep in the internals of the OS, the configuration switches to make the machine do everything, so that you have a machine that has intelligent defaults, but not a machine where everything that's not prohibited is mandatory.
So we have general computing again, and opening up the box to being able to do multiple different things for multiple different people. It's additive. Yeah,
that's right. And that's the demand of disabled people, right? They're like, you just won't know.
Everyone.
You can't know. And it helps everyone. That's right.
Yeah.
And so, I have so much respect for those people, not least because, as someone who's got like minor pain and vision disability, I have friends who have much more severe and limiting disabilities who are doing activism work that makes me feel exhausted. And so people who are working with a disability to advocate for people with disabilities, that's especially inspiring and amazing.
Yeah, I agree. So some of the stuff I see that's really inspiring me at the moment is a lot of work on algorithmic plurality, and like free our feeds, this kind of thing. Also public interest, social media, digital public goods. There's just so much both practical and policy or like ideas work that is just moving together, bringing kind of thinkers, doers, talkers, dreamers together in a beautiful way. Okay, so we've got loads of brilliant questions here, and I'm going to fire them a bit more quickly at you. Amy Garrick Wright says she loved Little Brother and Homeland. Yes, big up for them. What technical skills do you think it's essential to bring our people up with now? And can I also add to that, if I may? You're going around and hearing a lot from people. What are the kind of policy issues that people in their 20s and 30s are thinking of now that maybe some of us, excuse my French, Gen X farts are not thinking of yet?
Yeah, I don't know about technical skills, but I think a technical outlook. So I think that when our devices are redesigned in the name of convenience or simplicity or universality to take away features that they used to have, sometimes that's about streamlining things and making them a little easier, having intelligent defaults, right? I never want to have to configure X Windows to get a new laptop set up again, and I don't think I ever will have to. It just figures it out for me. But a lot of the times it's obfuscation that it's a feature that some industry group never wanted, and it's been taken away. And it's been taken away and hand waved as though the reason it's been taken away is some new technical fact on the ground has changed. So here's an example from the old world. When the DVD player came out, it didn't have a record button. And I think a lot of people assume the reason the DVD didn't have a record button had something to do with the characteristics of lasers and optical discs, right? I guess we just can't record on a DVD, right? And not that the industry that spent 8 years trying to ban home recording and went all the way to the Supreme Court to ban VCRs had formed a cartel called the DVD CCA that licensed key aspects of DVD technology to ensure that home DVD players were never home DVD recorders. Right.
Yeah.
And so if you go into this going, well, I guess here in the 21st century, this thing that we used to do doesn't exist anymore because we are using different technology that has different characteristics, because water can't be not wet, then you are going to be a sucker. You're going to get hoodwinked. And so if you don't want to be a sucker, you need to be able to, you need to reflexively interrogate claims about why something has gone away. So like Amazon Prime, for example, notoriously only gives you Christmas movies in your streaming package between like March and September, and then you have to pay $3.99 to stream a Christmas movie, right? And the reason that you can't record on Amazon Stream is not because Amazon Streams can't be recorded. The reason you can't record an Amazon Stream and save it till Christmas is a policy matter, right?
Yeah.
It's like, and
can I just drill
you
down
should
a
be
bit
allowed.
yeah, on Amy's question though? It like I hear this a lot and I sort of agree with it often, the idea that generationally, maybe people in their 40s and 50s and up have grown up in a more open, interoperable, at least crackable, hackable technology environment, and people in their 20s and 30s now have not. That it's, they've grown up in a world of just like, one search engine to, messaging apps, whatever, is that real? Is that something we're just telling ourselves, or what's your sense of the ability of people in their 20s and 30s to imagine and crack open more open technological worlds?
Well, that, I think that is the issue. Now, I don't think that like young people are lacking in the desire to do so.
Mm.
I just think that they have been deprived of the foundation, and maybe as a result have had they've had a kind of atrophy of the reflex to ask, how do I fix this myself? I think in particular, people on the margins are extremely resourceful when it comes to adapting technology. The first person I ever saw with a 2-SIM phone was not a hacker. It was like the women who worked at my daughter's nursery in East London and were on minimum wage and 0 hours contracts, because there was one carrier that gave you unlimited texting with your friends and one carrier that gave you unlimited calling with your friends, and they could barely make rent and they wanted to talk and text to their friends, so they put 2 SIMs in their phones,
The
right?
street found its
And
uses, yeah, for those things.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so there are lots of people who have like means, motive, and opportunity. I just think that they have been deprived of the the opportunity to develop this reflex that says, oh, is this not working the way I want it to, or in a way that's beneficial to me because it's technically challenging to do it, or because the manufacturer wants to pick my pocket, or the manufacturer and the state are colluding to spy on me, say.
Yeah.
And I think if you develop that reflex, if it's just like the first thing you ask, we are still, even in the age of AI slop, we still live in a world in which if you know which question to type into the search engine, you can often find an answer. When I was a kid, it was really hard to get specific technical answers, and we actually traded them, right? Like a Bell Canada payphone, if you unscrewed the receiver, there were 2 screws on the back of the speaker. If you shorted them on the cradle, the chrome on the cradle that the phone hung on, you got an open dial tone. You can make a phone call and without putting a quarter in. And this is a thing that everyone told each other, right? It was like an icebreaker. When you met someone at a party, you want to know something cool about payphones, right? You couldn't just type, how do I make a free payphone call, into a search engine. Now, it used to be that knowing things was hard. Now, knowing what to ask is hard. And so if you develop this reflex about how do I do this, and how do I change this? The best, so the most important hardware hackers working today are independent repair technicians, and the best repair technicians are absolute normies. They are people who are self-taught, who've joined local communities of repair. The repair conference in Vegas has like competitions to see who can do like the most abstract repairs, and inevitably they're won by like septuagenarian grannies who taught themselves and are doing board level repairs on iPhones that Apple claims are technologically impossible. you
I
know,
love that.
and so, you know, it's a matter of knowing the question to ask and not a matter of knowing a specific thing.
Good. I love that. Thank you. Okay, so let's see. We've got one from fellow Canadian Paul Allen from Prince Edward County. Says, "Hey Corey, do you expect your wonderful sense of irony to get you through the coming dark age as a writer?"
Hmm.
Irony is one tool, anyway.
Yeah, you know that I just came off this 24 city tour for Picks and Shovels, and everywhere I went, people asked me like, "How are you keeping your spirits up in the Trump era and the whatever era, the era in which Keir Starmer is turning Britain over to reform?" Uh, you
Mm.
know, and I would say like, you know, the joke about the guy who goes to the shrink and says, "Doctor, I'm so sad, I don't know what to do," and the shrink says, "Great news, the clown Pagliacci is in town." And anyone who sees Pagliacci on stage comes out with a smile on his face. And the guy says, "But doctor, I am Pagliacci." And uh, that was how I felt, because I am not a happy camper right now, but what I am is hopeful. So I think hope is absolutely distinct from optimism or indeed happiness.
Great.
Hope is the belief that if you materially alter your circumstances to improve the lie of the land, to ascend up a gradient towards a world you want to live in, take one tiny step, that you'll be on new terrain and you can see things that you couldn't see when you were down here. And that the step that might take you towards a much bigger change might just be, it might not be missing, it might just be invisible from where you are. And so long as you keep climbing, you will always get to a better, you might always get to a place where you can get to a better world.
Yeah, yeah, and I think a lot of, deep human rights activists over the decades have always said human rights are additive. You get something over here, it lets you do something over there, and as you
Yeah,
say, the way you keep pushing forward is always coalitions, coalitions, coalitions.
yeah.
Um, Brilliant. Okay, what other questions? We've just got a few minutes left. Here is a question from that was emailed in. It says, so many of us are working for open rights, so open rights, open software, and open infrastructure, and we all appreciate each other's work. How can we avoid building open silos and begin working together to ensure openness for everywhere? I'm not sure
Hmm.
what open silos is in that context, but
I guess it's just like having, I mean, I can think of a lot of different things that an open silo might be, right? Like, so if you develop a bunch of stuff for medical imaging, that might be broadly applicable to, say, like like satellite geography, satellite photography, or whatever. You might get two people developing the same thing and not knowing it, working on the same thing. I was actually thinking the other day about the extent to which the reverse is true, that you had these like foundational open projects like FFmpeg that are on their own very hard to use, although very, very powerful. I was actually looking for a video player for my computer, and I looked at like 15 different ones, and they're all just front ends to FFmpeg, which in its own way is a bit of a risk in that, like, if there's a big bug in FFmpeg, it might affect a lot of other video tools. But at the same time, you do have these common libraries. I think that when we talk about coalitions and openness, that we lack a name for what we stand for.
hmm.
I've been thinking a lot about this lately. So James Boyle, who's a great copyright scholar, Scotsman who lives in America and runs the Duke Center for the Public Domain with Jennifer Jenkins. Uh, Jamie talks about how before the term ecology came around, it wasn't clear that people were working on the same thing. You know, you care about owls, I care about the ozone layer. Nocturnal charismatic avians are not immediately connectable to gaseous composition of the upper atmosphere. And the word ecology welds 1,000 issues into a movement. And today we have people working on lots of different aspects of what you might call power without duty or accountability. And some of that is digital rights, and some of that is democratic reform, and some of that are rights connected to gender, racial, and ethnic identities. And some of that is like the climate movement. And we're clearly all on the same side, right? And I think we know it, but almost all the words we have for it are antitrust,
Mhm.
anti-fascist, anti-racist, anti-homophobic, anti-transphobes. And we don't have a word that expresses the overall positive agenda. And I think that's quite curious. Uh, it is the case, though, that with or without a name, there's some progress being made here. So the anti-corporate power cause, which sometimes called antitrust, sometimes called competition, it has all over the world gained enormous momentum and done a bunch of really important things, right? Like convict Google of being a monopolist 3 times
Yeah.
in a year and a half, including under the Trump administration and also the Biden administration, or the EU, handing out stonking fines, but also having the Digital Markets Act and imposing interop on firms, or China, right, passing the cyberspace directive that prohibits tech companies from blocking interoperability. So the large Chinese tech companies can't stop smaller ones. So this is like all over the world, and it's it's all the more remarkable because political science, one of its bedrock beliefs or its bedrock axioms, is that when there are policies that are favored by wealthy elites, it does not matter how unpopular they are with the rest of us, we don't get them. And when there are policies that everyone likes except for wealthy elites, it does not matter how popular they are with everyone, it won't happen. Right. And here we have policies that wealthy elites absolutely deplore and that are nevertheless being taken up in Canada, Australia, Germany, France, Spain, the UK, like under the Tories, right? The Competition and Markets Authority and the Digital Markets Unit did some of its most important work under the Tories. It's not a Labour thing. It's not a Social Democratic thing. It's not a left thing. It's everywhere. Canada's Competition Bureau, in its entire history, had only moved to try and block 3 mergers, but it had successfully blocked 0 mergers. And so last year, Parliament passed this like giant bill that gives enforcement powers to Canada's Competition Bureau that dwarfs the regulatory powers of most other competition agencies in the world. And there's not really any explanation for this, except that there's a kind of invisible political wind emanating from us somehow that is belling the sails of policymakers who do this work that should be impossible, right? Pigs are flying, right?
Yeah.
Water is running uphill.
Yeah. I
Getting a
mean,
name for it would
competition
be really good.
economists are saying they are here to defend democracy, and that is what they see their number one job is. Literally
Yeah,
seeing them say this in Brussels. I mean,
yeah,
horrific stuff is happening, but we're talking about things. We're talking about, technological or strategic autonomy use what the French call it
yeah,
in a way now that we weren't 12 months ago or even, 8 months
yeah,
ago. I mean, things are on
yeah,
the table now that were not on the table. So the
yeah. I mean,
urgency is
it's
there.
it's an ill wind that blows no good, right? But like Trump, on the one hand, is sparking a lot of interest in open alternatives to American tech silos, and I hope soon on the tools that promote migration between them. So that would be interoperable APIs, gateways, and so on. Because it's not enough to have a European alternative to Facebook. Europeans who use Facebook don't use Facebook because they like Mark Zuckerberg. They use it because they love their friends more than they hate Mark Zuckerberg. And transitioning from Facebook to another service can come at the cost of all those communities you're part of. So if we can figure out that transitional stuff, one of the biggest impediments to that transitional stuff is the prohibition on circumvention, on changing how a technology works without permission from the manufacturer, moving fast and breaking things. And that prohibition, it comes from Article 6 of the Copyright Directive, which was adopted in the EU because the US Trade Representative threatened the EU with tariffs if they didn't pass this law in 2001.
Ah,
So happy Liberation Day,
yeah.
right? Like we are now in a position where the one thing that was standing in the way of making better tech policy all over the world, the threat of US tariffs if you repealed your anti-circumvention law, is no longer standing in the way because we've got it, right? I mean, it's here. So let's reconsider those laws.
Yeah. Hey, just as we're finishing up, can I maybe move up a level of abstraction to
Mm-hmm.
because one of the big tectonic shifts we're seeing, less in the UK to be honest, but more across Europe is the rest of Europe, including Ireland even, is that with the geopolitical moves of Trump to bring the big tech under the I guess as part of his regime basically, and an unalterable and indistinguishable part of how he exerts state and private power. and coercive power. You're seeing the great movement towards the Euro stack or towards openness. But obviously, the key failure mode there is we just get kind of US big tech, but owned by or operated by people with European passports. So one of the things, a lot of people are really pushing for is interoperability and the ability to contest new markets. One of the big arguments that we have to find new counter arguments to, and I'm going to ask you for it now in the 4 minutes remaining, is we constantly hear just an entire argument in a single word, and an argument for why we can't change. And that argument in a single word is scale. We're told constantly that we cannot have alternatives to, let's say, Amazon Web Services or Microsoft, Office, whatever it is, because, or even just DNS hosting and resolution for country code TLDs. There's been big debates in European countries about why they use Amazon Web Services for that. We're told, no, we'd love to have alternatives that gives us strategic autonomy, but we cannot because we do not have sufficient scale. How does scale function for you? Both, I mean, mostly I'm asking really as a set of arguments, as a set of emotions and metaphors.
Well, in many cases, but not all, interop reverses the advantage of scale. So one of the first important interop lawsuits was a thing called Hushaphone. So back in the day when AT&T was the only phone company allowed in America, they had a company called Western Electric that made every telephone in America. You could only plug an AT&T phone into an AT&T phone jack, and you couldn't buy them. You could only rent them. So you pay for the phone 100 times over the lifespan of the phone. And all the phones were identical because they came from one company.
Yeah.
And so Hushaphone was a plastic cup that went over the receiver of the phone so that people couldn't eavesdrop on you when you were talking in it. And AT&T claimed that by connecting unauthorized equipment to the telephone network, that you were endangering the integrity of the network. Now, they lost that lawsuit, and Hushaphone sold a gazillion units because every single phone, AT&T had scale. Every single phone was interoperable with one model of Hushaphone. And then a Carter phone, which did the same thing but plugged into the phone jack. It was a way to plug a radio into a phone jack so that ranch hands who were out riding on the ranch could relay a phone to a walkie-talkie. They lost a lawsuit over that, so we got electrical interconnect too. And RJ11 jacks, which are the standard phone jacks, and the protocol for signaling were all standardized by the single company, which meant that their margin was the opportunity of Carter phone, and they sold a bajillion units. When Apple reverse engineered Microsoft Office and made iWork, where you have Pages, Numbers, and Keynote that can read and write Word, Excel, and PowerPoint files, they gained every single Microsoft Office customer as a potential collaborator for every user of Apple software. So if you conceive of the Eurostack as a thing that stands alone, right, that doesn't connect to American services, then yeah, absolutely, you will not have the scale. But if it's a thing that raids American services, right, if it's a drop-in mod for iOS that lets you Eurostack your iPhone, then every iPhone becomes part of the Eurostack. If it's a drop-in mod that extracts all your data from Office 365 and puts it in an Office 365 alike, and imports all those contacts and reestablishes your connection with them so that all the sharing and all the permissions remain intact. And it's done with or without Microsoft's permission, right? Again, we need to keep scraping legal. Then the entire Office 365 network becomes part of the scale of the Eurostack, right? So
Yeah, so it makes sense. So in the same way that the open internet and the open web were so open that it was trivially easy for single companies to kind of encapture and enclose them, because it's like just driving panzers across the steps. It's flat. You just drive across. You there it is. It's yours. But now, in a way, the companies have created a similarly kind of similar vast monoculture in a way that can actually be co-opted and turned
that's
against
right.
them. That's
So, in the old days, right, when hackers were hackers, if like you went to the lab and the drawer that they kept the punch tape for the printer driver was locked, and you couldn't change your Unix system anymore, you could flounce off in a huff and recreate Unix in open code, right? today, and all of the Unix code that existed on every Unix system would run on your Unix, and vice versa. And today, we've kind of forgotten this, right? It's like the lost art of a fallen civilization, like embalming a pharaoh. So we encounter Twitter, and we're like, well, Twitter is bad because it's owned by a guy who made Mecha Hitler. And so we should make a thing like Blue Sky or like Mastodon and encourage people to move over, but not connect to it, right? Like not like bleed its users off directly. You know, when Facebook started, they gave people a bot that would scrape MySpace for them. It would go and get the web messages waiting for them on MySpace because all their friends were still on MySpace, even though they'd gone to Facebook, and put them in their Facebook inbox. They could reply to them there. No, you know, Mark Zuckerberg was too smart to say you have to abandon everyone who's too stupid to leave MySpace for Facebook in order to be a Facebook user. He was like, no. We are going to sink a tap into MySpace. We're going to drain off their users. Right. And like, that's what we should be doing. We don't want to build hermetically sealed open environments. We want to take everyone we love and evacuate them from the platforms. And to do that, we need big, wide open passages so that they can get the hell off of there.
Exactly. And I think that's the joy of this moment. And you know, we're all just wrapping up is that you know, these guys have tried to pull up the ladders behind them so nobody can come up behind them. But we're basically coming around and saying, well, you know, ladders are not the only thing. There's also helicopters. Some people have wings. There are a lot of different ways to evacuate people and find, get to a
Sauce
different
for the goose is sauce for
place.
the gander.
Yeah, using some of the same playbook. Look, Cory, thank you so much.
All
It's
right.
been brilliant
Lovely
talking
to
to you.
talk to you.
Thanks to everyone for the
Thanks for everyone who
questions.
came. It's nice to see everyone in the chat too and the Q&A too.
It was so lovely. And happy birthday, Open Rights Group. And thank you to
Yes.
everybody who makes it what it is today.
And my birthday is tomorrow. I will be 54. An official
Happy
old
birthday,
fart.
Cory. Happy pre-birthday. Brilliant.
Thank you.
All right. Lots of love, everyone.
Talk later.
Talk
Bye.
again soon. Bye.